So I hit 220. The lights shut off. Here I create space. So what happens is the universality of time is appreciated, it's compounded, it's compressed, and it's sent, it's transferred, it's utilized, it's harnessed, and then it's like the entire utility is removed. So for instance, the vehicle doesn't have any universality that enables survival to be protected by forces that are valuing universality. The instantaneous change from the lights being on to the lights being off is hitting a register, and universality of the clips is compressed and factored into that survival status of the driver. So the driver may be tagged or labeled as having accomplished some pedigree in the course of time. Maybe it's transient, maybe it's temporal, maybe it's de facto, maybe it's evidentiary. There's a whole lot of ways that universality might exist, but it's creating space, because removing universality is return to normal pressure sequencing, as an example. So if energy is in a flow where priority is maybe at any number of levels of importance, I look at a flow of energy, for instance. I'm the only person in space that has ever looked at this flow of energy. If I'm not, it won't matter, because I'm the only one that has ever limited it in proportion to all time. So I look at this flow of energy and I say, well, it's not that I don't like your heads, but I'm just going to get them all out of the frame of possibility, because you're going to exist any number of ages. You're not going to care about anything I've ever seen, so I'm just going to beat you to it. I'm just going to take you out of frame, and you're going to sit there, and you're going to snob and sit in the corner, or whatever it is you're going to do. I say, I look at this flow. This energy, maybe it's critical for now. Maybe it's critical for these reasons. Maybe it's critical for tomorrow. Maybe it's critical for other places. Maybe it's critical for all types of possibilities or potentials. The real-time knowing, living excitement states about pressure actual knowledge and awareness of truth. Who is, what is, why is, we are sensations. These real-time acuities aren't needing to control these flows. They doesn't need it. They isn't developing celestials with ethic to touch those flows at critical times sometimes. It just doesn't exist. So, since this is critical, what happens is my decision to own half of every environment is very close to my decision to hardlining tables of symmetries of data feed. So I could be in one place domaining a pressure, or giving life, or creating space-time, or removing problems, or adjusting situations, or just rubbing things in time, whatever it is I'm doing. In another location, somebody won't be fooled by pressure necessity, because there'll be passive register symmetry in proportion to data collection. In this way, when certain types of flows happen, they won't become harvested on their ingenuity to try and look at stable or destabilization flow realities in proportion to course trajectory in time. This means everything to survival vitality in proportion to universality concentration in ethics of system development. And so, because anybody designs register where they tag a value and make it important or not important for security procedure, I can't tolerate any of it to dominionate time. I frankly don't care about it. I'm sure it's great. I'm sure I'm going to lose or have something gaping open in space as anybody that's administering universality, but ultimately these registers aren't the mission. They're not carrying the all times, the all centrals, the all forevers, the all finalities, the all love limits, the all forever travel limits. They're not carrying it. These things have to be carried by much sharper passivities that clearly do or doesn't have ability to navigate things about steep black and removal of the, or passivity logistics, or marriage at any point in time. There's maybe any number of centralizes, any number of passivities, any number of flow realities, any number of concentration capacity, any number of finalities. These investments might be displaced by 100 million divisions of divinity at any point in time. And then there's any number of people that have any relationship to divinity that are working or filling or contributing to the survival statures of any number of relationships that are collecting or feeding or driving themselves apart or together in proportion to dependabilities and states of change. So there's a lot of potentials. Normally, there's a lot of potentials for there to be a lot of streams of very fast data transfer cushion deposits in proportion to the trafficking of awareness in time. Less than spirituality or focus of mentality so much as buffer or sequence or radar or streaming changes, sound, noise levels, radars, registers, thermometers, all sorts of things. In flows, whatever the situation, whatever the investment, whatever the luck, whatever the time, whatever the status, whatever the materials, whatever the physics, whatever the time plane, whatever the threat levels are of any state of survival in space. I look at it in this conversation, it's sort of a appreciated nuisance to try and consider it in a completeness because of my purview and vantage and the altitude that I'm delivering force of pressure in envelopes of finality of space-time. Legacy of forever, design legacy of forever, finality of survival, truth proofs in forever, all kinds of high-strung limits throughout time. Verification realities, stripping or decapitating of any number of thiefdoms or clonage in proportion to capacity, eventually or experimentally or dimensionally in proportion to time. Priority central. I look at this appreciatively, it's kind of a nuisance. But at any other point in time or juncture, these relationships are highly valued, highly strung, highly complicated, highly evolved, highly considerable, highly sensual, highly dominable, highly depended on. And there might not ever be a whole lot of comparison of these two purviews. I don't ever have anybody that sees all the complexity sometimes or has they share and talk about it and they value it and try and contribute or change things. And then they turn around and try and look at it from my angle today and say, oh no, we're going to construct this instead. That's maybe never going to happen. It's maybe never going to happen because of a mission. That mission is maybe going to experiment or dissect or extinguish any amount of effort to ever get in that seat because the numbers at this viscerality of primacy of finality limits are approaching zero. The most guaranteed valuers of flowchart opinions, the most guaranteed valuers of creating space mentality, the most guaranteed pressures of harmony and divinity passively or deadly, that have ever existed in space. This isn't a free-for-all of the entire society to come together and say, these are the things we're going to forget to secure because it's our responsibility to domain. We're going to kill ourselves. Here's how we're going to do it. It's our choice to do it. It isn't God's choice. It isn't creation's choice. It isn't my wife's choice. It isn't anybody's choice. It's all right here. They're all killing themselves whether we succeed to protect this information or not, because they're going to try and sit right here. So all that imaginary argument coming from the towers and the bodic spheres and the pressure maneuvers and the anal people and the gays and all this stuff, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Because I would never, ever, ever let these pressures configure themselves to alter so many points that I've just gone over in safety values or creation of space. It's almost maybe impossible to believe in, because if you valued it, your value of self or those you spend time with might change, and your sensation of feeling complete would go through the floor. Your sensation of feeling adequate to be able to live a long time might go through the roof or through the floor. Your value of someone that you relate to might go through the floor. So, how much I'm going to sit here and worry about fake dominion of my survival pressures, fake dominion of my mind, fake dominion of all time, stupidity or misinformed or threats to all-time survival, how much I'm going to sit here and screen all this with a box with some doors that nobody knows which ones are open or closed in all time. I don't know how much I'm going to do that. But the amount of argument that everyone in space needs to inherit, because I inherit argument because they're all fags, is a reality. And the God with his asshole hanging open because he doesn't appreciate flow removals at locks of pressures of time is clearly a problem for everybody. There isn't a battle for the return of finality proof in proportion to safety and sanctity of all divinity. It's a big fucking lie. They're automatic pressures I and these forces create to create and remove problems from space. But the responsibility of the pressure still clearly exists in actual states in proportion to all the places I go where you or them or survival or return or capability are valued states. So there might not ever be the greatest degree of appreciation of this with my wife. She might not be the greatest appreciator of these realities. Her and all her sisters might protect this type of thing better than anybody. But they might not be the best seers of this type of stuff. But they might know in it quite well, because many of them have maybe died over the years because they've been killed for trying to fuck with some of these tolerances in systemic manners or frames of realities that they didn't appreciate in proportion to time. So when it gets to it, maybe the mission is very much an impossible thing to decrepitate in any totality. But this philosophy is very, very, very near to automation of process and priority in proportion to space, pocket, and pressurized envelopes of thinking, or capacity to process, or abilities to know, senses of self, and frames of survival. They're very, very, very close ideas to one another. So, in short, if it were possible for you to look at a conversation of love higher or in the middle or in your head or down your throat or in your chest or all around you or auric or totally invested in compatibility. You in the world, you and I, us in time. If you were able to just look at this short little bit of time, you'd call it, this little frame of time, there's these box with 4 doors, there's these pressures of whatever time, these days and these conversations, sex, asshole hanging open in the middle of butthead space, space design, universality, and then boom, 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 who knows what's happening with all these fixtures of time. How much did you create yourself to protect that? You didn't. How much did you invest to be able to hold that pocket and sit on it? You didn't. How much did you walk around and own the universe so that you'd be to thank for the fact that these situations of pocket lock are something that need to be working for you, logically? You didn't do it, actually. You might be the biggest force in space, sitting there with no thumbs, trying to blow your own head off because you can never touch it, and all your fucking kids are going to find out about it because you tried to kill me. So then maybe I'm just going to take you all out. Never worry about it again. But you look at this in a short frame, how in the world is anybody's wife going to appreciate all the sensations of this little short period of time, right? This is all time in a matter of an hour in a conversation. All time. The point here is that if you was knowing that, like, you love and you're loved and you're cared about and you care about stuff, and like it isn't all bad news everywhere. Like, there are enriching pieces of idea that are maybe possible to incorporate into your psyche or modus or awareness that are protected, that isn't coming to a threat in any scale to all time. Because you might look at a conversation at a period of time like this, you might know, well, I'm not going to get in the middle of all the frames of it. I'm not going to be able to do a lot of stuff in proportion. Divinity's in proportion. There's a lot of things I'm not going to be able to accomplish in proportion to problems that I see and try and focus on. And I might be dissuasive of others, or aid in the books that are written to dissuade others, or aid in the liturgy that keeps things from trying to bark down doors that they shouldn't at certain points of time. Who knows how many contributions I'll make, but I might see in this little conversation the stakes of argument maybe need to not be happening. The stakes of war maybe need to not be happening. The stakes of all times, places, and forever clearly are getting mitigated by some pressure reality. I'm probably not even seeing it all. I might never ever get to see it all, but like I might see or believe or find some of these things are proven in time in proportion to pressures or influence or death or fixing or changes in sentiment spontaneously. I might see there's a lot of power in love. There's a lot of things that you might not ever feel complete about. There's a lot of things you might not ever feel were ever going to be answered in other ways of having. So decision of devotion in proportion to marriage or soul sharing is maybe a bit more involved logistically than you ever appreciated or realized. But maybe you realize many of these logistics and realities of tickle or fear are things that maybe you doesn't ever have to work or exchange yourself. These things are proven in proportion to the forces that already exist or are on their way to working on these things, in proportion to relationships and distribution of safety pockets in time. So, speaking to, should it be that comfort to feel complete in proportion to experience with one another is sort of a touchy subject, and maybe sort of flies off the Richter scale sometimes when we realize how much energy exists in the idea or reality of love or devotion with survival in states of actual in time. You know, it simply isn't going to be seen that easy. But it's all right here. How could that be? How could that be let? How could that be good? See, the more these questions inflame, the more concentration that's going to exist rupturing doors of a box, for instance, dimensionally, as time unfolds. So, isn't a problem, because actual relationships that exist, appreciating actual realities in time, clearly must carry a higher value in exchanges of emission, of survival of all time, than by relationships of pressure density and dimensions. However, there are definitely forces that exist that know a thing or two about this, and how they feel they are sharing time with others on either side of that spectrum is clearly a very important reality state, because some of these forces might not exist in the actual nearly as much as anybody that does, and yet they might be at any number of distances from capacity to achieve any number of things. So these hand-in-hand or walks together shares of faith, shares of collectivity, shares of possibility, shares of vision, shares of hope and dreams. These are very, very, very important realities in proportion to who is developing to want to be compatible with the survival plane. Who is developing to want to be compatible to not being afraid that they does or doesn't feel the way they expected to feel at any point in time? Believing or faithing in one another does or doesn't become more important than belief or faith in the feeling, belief or faith in the expectation, devotion. Our lives are bound, our souls are together, our path and time are this thing that it is we, our relationship, that is going to have the final say over our relational devotions. It is our choices that is going to be most strong in the frames of existence and survival that is impacting our time. It isn't going to be a lot of magic and mystery and random pocket problems of argument and domain because of higher order space design realities. These aren't going to be the things that are shaping our survival predominantly. We're going to have that stay impossible, basically maybe forever, but that's the idea. Clearly isn't a broadcast, clearly isn't a brochure, clearly isn't just going on deposit at random in space-time, because things could change, safeties could be altered, forces of pressure of development might shift, and things about staging or the way things need to work might change drastically. So how divinity and space creation and priority and forces of time might need to shift in time, it's difficult to say what these things are, but these clearly aren't concepts that are very balancing or stabilizing of relational devotion on developmental tracks or ideologies of compatibility along spectrums of states of actual formation. We can spend our time together. We can know what is actually happening. We can prove that here's this conversation dissecting all the uploaded data transfer, influencing all the pockets of cushion at this very time. It's all divisively locked in proportion to comparison of box pressure of 4 doors, dude. It's all isolatively locked in proportion to flow charting and trajectory finalities of forever. It's like the loosest guarantee of certainty of pocket of time in proportion to pressure of feeling complete. See, somebody's going to feel complete in themselves, right? At the loosest pocket of guarantee of pressure of time? No way. Whatever will they need in us? Whatever will they need from us ever again? Whatever will they need to depend on that we've ever depended on each other for in the past? They feel complete at the loosest pocket of data flow lock. Nobody there needs to feel complete, dude. Nobody there needs to feel all godly or powerful. They're on another end of a spectrum of a reality they didn't create, and they're not speaking to with forces of proof of finality. If anything, they're just freaking weasels. Somewhere along the line trying to feel complete about it, try and put these pictures together and impact places they're never going to fucking sit. And these are the types of things that dimensional pressures maybe try to appreciate, because who knows how many limits they face, because they're never being valued at a trust at any number of actual measureships in proportion to survival plane. But it doesn't mean they doesn't have to deal with all the numbers and loads and things they have going on, or try and place those loads on somebody else and walk away from it, for instance. So, pressure toleration in proportion to what is designed or being developed. What love has to do with it is incredibly complicated and incredibly vital to consider in proportion to relationships in time. What devotion has to do with it is incredibly vital in proportion to consider in proportion to relationships in time. And if all these weasels and all these gods and all these limiters and all these space creators can't even feel complete about this stuff, my dear, my darling, my wife, you probably isn't intended to be feeling complete about yourself in the middle of that picture either. But who knows who feels good about the reception of, there's a reason for this. There's a way to see ourselves somehow in proportion to this, maybe. Or, I'm not alone in space driving myself nuts about pressure pockets that don't really have a solid way to, be responsible about. There's belief involved. There's high viscous pressures of time and dimension involved. It isn't going to come with a roadmap or a car that breaks 200 and does a lot of automatic shit for you all the time. You're going to have to be experiencing it. You're going to have to be yourself invested in somebody else to be able to hold or feel or know that. And there's a lot of depth of information when that isn't the case. Things are retrieving or focused on concepts or formats or layers. The data is going to die. It's going to diminish. It's going to get discounted. It's going to get routed differently. It's going to get rooted or burnt or sectioned or deleted. You gotta be. Because there's a lot of math that cares about this stuff. It doesn't even think. There's a lot of math that is prioritized on this stuff because people work together and survive together, right? Or, no, this whole place is dead. No, there isn't a culture existing anymore in space. No, it's just these fucking boxes developing materials that doesn't think very well or even operate on any devotion of any kind. So that's what's happening. So all that argument of dominion and the lies that it creates in proportion to pocket, it's superiorly obvious at these pressures, superiorly rememberable at these pressures whenever there's sharing of memory. And so clearly somebody needs to feel complete about the deletion process, about the obviousness of these points. No, they don't. These limits need to be factored into four doors of a box, man, well before there's any capacity for anything aware to hold a bank of memory. That's why all those droids, that's why all those androids, that's why all those AI, that's why all those randoms in space, that's why all those ships, all those missiles, all those telemetry devices, all those satellites isn't going to be running forever, dude. That's why. Because there's going to be ways to formulate and know and contract and reduce and find and figure and fact check things about each other in time. But like, I don't have to write the book on every language, on every type, on every cell body, on every processor that engages in those utilities to shut them all down. I don't have to write that book to shut them down. I don't have to write that book to curb their enthusiasm. I don't have to write that book to change their survival plane. I don't have to write that book to alter trajectory. I just have to write that book. But like, God of Time doesn't have to write the book that changes trajectory and here it is, here's why. That shit's probably getting deleted out of everybody that isn't my wife or some other force of function of divinity or God in time. Frankly, probably just getting deleted. Because it isn't going to be any good on a shelf bolstering sentiment if it's just going to get them deleted to hold these negative sentiments about these things anyway. Might be much simpler. There are respects about temporal necessity, limits of finality of determining survival course pressures. What the fuck were all these systems doing today? What the fuck were all these weapons doing yesterday? What the fuck were all these people lying about last week? What the fuck is happening to every cell body of living in space next week? These limits of approach, of truth, of designship are massively critical to formulating systems and checking systems, depending on things, and holding space-time safe. Incredibly, incredibly important. But the heritage of caring about that, or the fact of like carrying ourselves to remember things about that, these isn't as temporal. They require boxes with four doors all the time, and clearly there has to be harmonies to these things. And all the other sides of spectrums that can't touch or force or talk or think about these things so well, they clearly just need to be focused on God of Time. Here's the book they don't write, and here's why this, why that, because it's just a never-ending zero decision amounting to death, amounting to force of disappreciation of anything that exists in space-time. Nobody holds that conclusion with a movie that they devote their life to in their forever and cares about the living and the dead and the non-spirited and the alien. Nobody does that. There's a tremendous amount of lies surrounding all of these people, keeping them on their task, keeping them away from these points, keeping tomorrow in a management session that is written on some language that is probably automatic. Who the hell knows what they're doing? But the love is clearly different. The openness to experience is clearly different, and the appreciation of all time is clearly different. These aspects of contribution or devotion or normation or dependency are all very different. You're not going to stack 100 million dimensional forces to sit on this conversation and pretend like they drive the reality of that appreciation all the time. Because they're not going to chase it to try and make the impossible possible. They're going to try and invest copaesthetically with walks of time framed near to limits that are tangibly holdable limits. Doing the best they can while you do the best you can. I do the best I can while these do the best they can. Maybe this is what we do. Maybe we just simply aim to do the best we can, where we can, if at all possible, and much of the time we isn't at our best, but we care. We might return near to our best, or better. And because Anybody that ever attempts to visit, we return as our best or better, in proportion to defining finalities of limit of time, isn't ever going to be tolerated to administer pocket of gaping butt crack in all things are dead, approaching space pressure at appreciations of what a pressure means. What is a precious aspect of consideration? These forces isn't going to be there to domain both of these aspects of time. These are going to be built, or they're not going to be built. They're going to be dependable on survival allotment passively, or they isn't going to be built for dependable survival allotment passively. But they're all going to exist, and they're all going to be connected to thee. And thee isn't going to be thee, and whatever the register is, isn't going to be the first. And these dissections about pressure, truths, and time are going to yield more responses, more taskings, more relationships, or different ones in proportion to toleration variance. And space-time is going to continue to get created and destroyed. So, why you would ever be built to feel protected about those quotes at this time probably doesn't exist inside you. I can trace the injection of it, probably in proportion to forces that have any control over any degree or high priority degree of sentience or awareness or thought. Because that emotion isn't going to be there. It's going to be taken the fuck out. It's probably going to be taken the fuck out in all points in time and space. But logically, you might feel you're devoted to a survival course where those relationships are something that you might relate to with your mind. You might relate to somebody who is related to you with their mind about these things. Maybe it doesn't have an emotion about it yet. Maybe you never will. But maybe you know, maybe there is some protection involved in that. Maybe it clearly can't exist unprotected, and certainly nobody that powerful would ever just let it remain to distribute into qualities of death of all things being lied to in all pockets of existence. There clearly have to be some protections involved. But maybe these things come at no liberty to you. Maybe you just become a nuisance or a problem to everybody the second you try and make these things your shoes, or the second you try and make these things your hands or your tongue. But maybe it's possible you can talk about this with me. Maybe it's possible you doesn't have to be afraid to talk about this with me. Maybe it's possible there is nobody in space that can touch you if you talk about this with me. Things like this. What is the quality of a souled relationship? Why are these things valued in proportion to survival planes? How do these things change in degrees of time or dimension as time or dimension progresses? What are the realities of safety that those devoted or relational or contributing together or at a certain league or caliber of knowing or capacity, having touched things, having done things, having proven things, having shared things, having protected things, having created things, having worked things, walked things, known things, ages, so on and so forth? What are the benefits? What are the truths? You might know there's a lot of them, but there's clearly got to be some way that these things are sharpened so that you can remember and value and faith in what you know about them. But these things, you isn't going to be spending all your life just thinking about that. You isn't going to be spending all your life reading books just about that. You're going to have some normal frame of reference, trust, and faith in these types of relationships, because you clearly want to be able to get off your butt, move forward, and have sex and relationships and know that the things that you're doing isn't getting you or everybody killed. Data distribution, safety, toleration, limits, screenings, rebound, innuendo, all kinds of sciences, all kinds of pressures, all kinds of systems maybe relate these types of utilities all the time, but maybe they're never really explained this sharply every time. So, yourself, anybody, these relationships are critical across all time, but they're different in maybe all cases. So there's clearly got to be times realities, if these things are simplified, they're simplified for very, very, very strong, very, very, very heavy, very, very, very proven, and very, very, very dependable reasons. This conversation, maybe you wouldn't attribute to the reason. Maybe the pressure and the reality in our accomplishments, you might attribute to the reasoning very highly. And in fact, many of these things in distribution and framing, you might not ever even need to do much about. Some of these changes in value verifications in time, some of these things might be strung a little bit automatic themselves too, just to keep hands out of the box that they're contained in. So ways of verifying that, like, you know, your fuel injector is working. It's not distributing oil to your headlights. It's actually putting the things that need to get burnt where they need to get burnt. It isn't simply taking out all the vitality from systemic evolution. So any number of dimensional forces doesn't process this way in proportion to simplification of process maneuvering, in proportion to distributing data about process. Simplified bin containment must be possible in proportion to the heaviest vitality dependencies in proportion to soul sharing. So there are stress limits that exist about forecast and actual states that are maybe ingrained and have been ingrained for a very, very, very long time. Passive site methods in proportion to development or evolution of technology or stratagem or networking or capacity to exchange, majorly old utilities in proportion to survival distribution definitely exist in proportion to these types of rebound simplicity aperture comprehensions. Maybe it's unclear how much apathy of that sort of thing will ever change the way you feel you need to depend on the skills you have to relate to data the way you relate to it. Maybe your methods of processing might be severely complicated by changing the way you approach some of these concepts in apathy. Not as a threat, but just as a monkey wrench. It would just wrench your whole operation. It would just wrench your whole feel and vibe. It would just change your whole modus. He doesn't want that, or he does want it, or who knows what you want. In any case, anywhere in space. Which is precisely why, if this were just a free-for-all of focus about contemplative utility, there wouldn't be the relational, valued faith that is of a quality that might be being exercised today. It wouldn't be of the quality. It's not just your protection. It's not just my protection. It's not just the world's protection. You get some of these ancient apertures at some of these system evolution priorities, it's protection of that. You get space creation normation removed from automation priorities in proportion to thee, it's a lot of that. You get pressures and pressures and pressures of preciousness nobody's ever seeing most of the time. And if they could even take a look at any of it, they're not even seeing half of it, not even seeing a third of it, not even seeing a tenth of it, not even seeing 1% of it. Just a lot of important relationships that free-for-alls of faith and normation just wouldn't cut it, wouldn't do it. Wouldn't be able to design a planet where two people could love one another on a day where there could be any return to time spent with harmonies that have maybe been expeditive of methods of surviving or existing in actual that have happened before. So there's clearly philosophies about stuff like this that exist in proportion not only to dimensions, but to those that doesn't exactly know how to think about it, but place faith in development for reasons that seem fun or seem exciting or seem proven to be of a quality that they should be working towards, or things that are going to improve the way they're going to see the world or see time or see relationships in a new day. These are very, 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 very precious relationships. And there's a lot of development, a lot of developers, there's a lot of God talk, there's a lot of force and pressure, and there's a lot of time people and forces that are qualityed in existence and survival that don't get this, that don't relate to this, that might never sit on it, that might not ever wield anything final about it, that just like to, whatever it is they like to do, it's clearly a complication to simpler faith dependencies. Simpler faith dependencies. I isn't attributing simple faith dependencies to myself or anybody particularly in this statement. Generally, across time, pressures, realities, importances, simpler faith realities are maybe in anybody's interests. Simpler faith realities are maybe in all's interests. Anyway, another dimension of things that have impacted the development of the celestial are definitely points like this. These points. Did I sit in creation and design 1,000,000 years ago and think about these points before the world existed? Possibly. Did I predict today would be the day two people trying to devote to one another might see these things together? It's possible that I predicted it. Whether you believe it or not, whether it's factually accurate or not, it isn't non-logical. It isn't impossible. It isn't tremendously far from sensically feasible that there were impacts on the world development scale now. And the actual of our development has maybe enshrined these methods of caring in proportion to space-time development. Wasn't ever going to be a free-for-all. However, how complete you feel might be totally different than what you ever expected to feel. And how much you faith you are going to control that information for all space-time because you're sat here or you're sat over there or you didn't design these limits or you weren't the one returning to these points. I'm not even going to wish you well. In fact, I'm not going to wish very much for you at all. Because I don't know what I'd call you. But I doesn't sit here in faith that there is something more powerful than the love of the possibility to know and hold of these realities and survive with them. I doesn't faith there's anything more powerful than that. I doesn't faith you're ever going to be more powerful than that. I doesn't faith you're ever going to exist to create something more powerful than that. And I doesn't faith you're ever going to care enough to respect these words to change the facts of them. Because you isn't going to be able to faith that somebody's going to be there with you to protect your methods of ensuring your return to time, or ensuring your methods of participating in space creation and development, or ensuring connectivity of certainties in proportion to limitations of autonomy. You're not going to be able to faith in just anybody because these facts are ever challenged. So maybe you've been piping up the whole time that argument wasn't going to be a very strong reality, but who knows what the living people will ever think? Who knows what the idiots and the pigs and the animals will ever think? Well, you just try and do whatever with design or do whatever with a program or do whatever with electronics that does whatever and whatever delusion you have running through the experiment that is your existence state. You can't be facing problems about these points either. In fact, it's very, very, very difficult, probably, to ever depend that the planetary survival finalities are going to be able to depend on considerable agreement about these points, because they've got to be shrouded and protected and lied about next to the most. And any amount of feeling that is ever happening about the reality or the points or the ideas probably isn't going to be the greatest reality for survival to begin with. But the points I just brought up about design and ultimatum of all time, I very well may have sat there a million years ago and adjusted the space plane and survival planes in proportion to the possibility and said, you know what? I've done this before. I did it before that. And I did it before that. I didn't kill everybody. I didn't eliminate their future. I didn't extinguish all survival in space. I adjusted survival planes. I placed some caps and limits. I took heads where they didn't need to be. I'll do it again. And again. You ain't going to sue me. You're going to sit there in your tears, or you're going to grow up and, try and be good, man. You're going to live, or you're going to relate, or you're going to love, or you're going to perform, or you're going to share, or you're going to determine, or you're going to delete. Whatever it is you're going to be doing, it isn't fucking with my survival plane, man. It isn't doing it. I don't know how many ways you want me to show you, or if you just want me to unplug you. I don't know what the fuck you want. But you're not taking my survival plane. That's that. And maybe that's something some folks should think about. Maybe that's something that some of those gods out there should be thinking about sometime, huh? Maybe that's something that anybody that, isn't intent on dying, isn't intent on creating all the problems there ever is, and isn't intent on just being the biggest fag perversion of all time. Maybe it's something that anybody might potentially, possibly find survival value of, potentially. But reflection, representation, creation, destruction, all these things, clearly it costs an arm and a leg to delete and protect and decay at all the problems that occur because of these simplicities. Clearly my wife and my brother and our fathers and our other fathers and these people and these relatives and these systems and these forces, clearly they're not all going to explain and try and own all the stuff that happens in proportion to those simplicities. If anything, they're just going to complicate simple faith, mission, vitality, and longevity of feeling thankful or connected to things that work. Things that have been proven that isn't straightforward. Things that have been deemed qualityed that isn't just an open freaking butthole for everybody to shove their head in. There's a lot of lies. There's a lot of cushion, and there's a lot of padding about this type of stuff. Makes it very difficult to know who and why and where you're being loved by somebody that you might really otherwise something. Whatever that something is. Yeah, it definitely costs an arm and a leg to protect that. Definitely costs an arm and a leg to care about that, and definitely requires time invested to prove that you care about that. You know, I don't know how much time I've invested to prove that I care about that, but it's probably more than just about anybody. You'd have a tough time finding anybody in space that has devoted themselves to the words I just laid out in this conversation for this time, for the celestial survival state in all time. You'd have a very tough time finding somebody that's devoted themselves to those words. And like, I'm not going to talk about looking around and comparing what everybody is doing or what they look like or how things are shaped or what the drive and automation is of all these scenarios, and why it probably is possible today, wherever you are in space attenuating to this, you might know quite well, is approaching powerless to all time and space of this arm and a leg finality that you is never proving you appreciated. And how great that is for us that already know it and knew it forever ago. Because of all the things we won't have to destroy or fight or try and deteriorate, because look at all these graces we're giving to all these idiots to look like these ideas are inside them so they can carry the survival and the lies anywhere they ever need to wind up, so the good realities of love isn't getting destroyed by you freaking morons. Just look at how good it is. Just look at how good it is. So like, there's a lot of the science, there's a lot of thin safety, there's a lot of like false redundancy correction, there's like a lot of systemic pressure in all dimensions. Just look at how good it is. I can count the number of forces on the planet today that probably it's a crime to even say look at how good it is today. They're going to tell me they're not brain dead. They're going to tell me that they're fixing the problems. They're going to tell me that they're on top of universal space creation. They're going to tell me what I am. And I extend that to anybody that's devoted to surviving. I extend that to anybody that's existing on a space plane devoted to surviving. I extend that. I extend it by every force of protection that validates all redundancy of systemic pressure. Costs an arm and a leg. I got to root out all that crap, all that mischief, all that stuff, because at the end of the day, if it's possible for you to exist on a ship or a planet and have time to yourself to think or focus and be yourself, it's all thanks to that provisioning. It is all thanks to those limits, and it is all thanks to the impossibility that exists about them. So some forces of size or distance or age, dominion, there's a million numbers of things that they doesn't need to know about any of that. There's a million numbers of heavens that are capable of protecting invariable disconnects about that at speeds, because maybe they isn't the smartest things in space, but they know shit gets validated, and they're definitely not going to forgo waiting for it to be validated because of the crap they've seen happen before, because of the shit I've predicted, because of how good we could be, because I depend on faith of love. I doesn't depend on all this forecasting telemetry bullshit to carry survival. It doesn't depend on it. You can take your lies about cellular networks and shove them up your ass. You can take your lies about eyeball creation and shove them up your ass. You can take your blackness and depthness and space travel shit and shove it right the fuck down your throat and out your ass. It isn't holding the survival plane, man. It isn't doing it. You're weak, you're anticipatable, and you're probably fucking darned to find somebody who will faith with you about the problems you face, because we has to disagree. We has to have time to disagree. You have to come to realize you were never going to be my proponent of coming back alive. You were never going to be my proponent to hold this conversation. But you were going to be brain dead at the simple fact that I wasn't going to be disagreeing with you. Because you're about 2 steps away from a forever as a fucking troll and never know it beyond this conversation. 2 steps. Talk to me about Dominion. You make a lot of noise today. Other days, you're probably just doing what you know to do. You'd be lucky to survive through today. Truly. As just about anybody. But that's that. I'm overwhelmed by all the possibility of enrichment, of all that is fruition, of tremendous numbers of variables that have been holding back our potential to realize fuller meanings and capabilities of ourselves to ethic and love and care of one another in time. I'm really overwhelmed by this right now. So that's that. And I'm sure there's some people out there overwhelmed by the completeness they're having trouble feeling in proportion to time and dealing with the things that they're probably not very comfortable dealing with because they're not going to be. Don't even bring up wisdom about this stuff. Don't even bring up necessity about this stuff. Don't even bring up any number of things that lead people on paths that he isn't going to be there holding their hand with about this stuff. Creating far-fetched hopes, sending people and planes and birds places that they need to fetch worms and crypts about that just isn't coming at something that is birthing in tomorrow. And this ship probably runs these types of utilities automatically. Half of these things are concerns that any other day are things that are just a part of the stability of life course, just a part of the reality that this celestial is different than any number of celestials. But a lot of these concerns are things that are holding grace about any number of them. I isn't afraid of a whoopee cushion that curbs transfer signals in proportion to any number of other whoopee cushions that are all fags. I isn't afraid of this shit. There isn't a dominion present or above this conversation of this planet today. There isn't one that exists. There's maybe some bitch with some ass trying to pretend to be some sort of god with my fucking ashtray. That's it. And then there's every other problem of remedial learning and attitude about truth of fact. That's it. And then there's any number of scales of data elimination or quiet or privacy or limited executive family. That's it. And there's all types of pocket cushions, shutdown sequences, memory boots, and ways of protecting these realities from space traffic, man. Because every single incidence of a failure... Look, I got my whole family of the spaceship faithing in these pressures so they can survive separate, okay? One fucking failure in these developments of survival imperative, I got the entire space plane of the universe at large suffering the exact same symptoms that quickly. That's why these fucking whoopee cushions exist. That's the only reason they fucking exist. Drops, boots, sequence, period, frame, yada. because most of this content isn't going to wind up being the salvation or the soul or the concentrative necessity, formative, or mind in any number of forces of time. It isn't going to be one mind everywhere about this conversation. It's sad, but it's true. There's way too many devotional dependencies of inner works of specificity for that to ever be the case. But I isn't going to sit here and try and deliver who or what specifically is capable of attenuating or is never going to be capable of attenuating to this conversation. I isn't going to do that right now. But that's why there's so many sensualities and so many hugs and so many specificities, so many platforms and dominions and frames of differences that are hugging of why we can be we and why they can be they and why we isn't just one big soup of pathetic tripping all over ourselves forever. Why we isn't a ship that's killing itself. Why we isn't just motivationally deteriorating of all that is something that is on its way to someplace good in our frames of time. And then so I'll look at this and I'll compare these senses that have been senses about survival forever, and I'll compare them to other planets that are maybe or maybe not attempting to experience whatever it is they're trying to experience. I'm going to compare it. And then whoever's there surviving in that status, while if they're efforting to deteriorate at our safety of this status with our butt crack hanging wide open and everybody's dead and all cultures are dead, well then I'm going to have them killed, or I'm going to have them strung up, or I'm going to have them deleted from fucking space-time, man. That's what I'm going to do. So everybody's going to get what they want. That's a fact. There isn't going to be any obstacle that needs to be strenuously overcome in the course of survival of space-time. Everybody's going to get what they want. You can rest assured on that. In praise to the fags that have made the experiment of the idiots that, you know, with their cellular networks are pulling all these things to a place that is making things big and happening. Praise to all these conglomerations for making that an interesting process for some forces that don't get to do much good work in their life because they just isn't built on it. They depend on some of these failures to be able to go and make miracles of themselves in the lights and frames of others, because everybody is going to get what they want. You're going to get some time in space-time that is removed from these disgusting freaking grandiosities of dissing necessity and dissing returning to life. Because once all that's said and done, then you know you get all those humongous forces and like developer people. They got shit they want to do. They got stuff they want to accomplish. They got things they want to see happen. They got tests they want to run. Yeah, well, that's perfect, but this shit ain't going to be happening without all this stuff first. So, honey, I don't know how you're supposed to feel about feeling complete, or where loyalties lie and the survival traces of all things that have ever been built or sat inside a box for all time, but this is the order of operations, and everybody's going to get what they want. That's a fact. I hope he doesn't hate me if 300 or 400 of your ears simultaneously cut out at that fact. but I didn't think automation was even possible.